I use the Mac Preview instead of any Adobe Acrobat products. It's just much simpler and free for the most part. I can edit, I can do anything I need to using Mac Preview that I could do in an Adobe product on there.
Welcome to Macpreneur, the show for seasoned solopreneurs looking to streamline their business on a Mac. Unlock the secrets to saving time and money with your host and technology mentor, Damien Schroers.
Hello. Today I have the pleasure to introduce Ray Shaub. Ray is the founder of La Consa Mental Fitness, where he coaches people in positive intelligence. He has been using Mac since they were first introduced in 1984. Ray, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Damien. I'm so glad to be here.
I think you're the first mental fitness I have had as a guest. And also, I'm not sure how many of my guests have had Macs since they were introduced. So that's a good thing. But before we go back in history, let's just have a quick understanding of what's your current Mac setup.
I have a MacBook Pro. It is a fully tricked out device with, at the time that I purchased it, had the maximum memory. It's the dual Intel chip in there. And it's about 6 years old now, and it is running like a racehorse. It is a beautiful device that I've had to have serviced once or twice for things like the battery, some ports needed to be replaced. But other than that, it's been a real workhorse.
Yeah, very good. Do you use it just with the built-in screen? Do you have a second monitor? Do you use both? What's your current setup?
I usually use it only with the built-in screen. However, I do also broadcast it to my home television set oftentimes. And so when I need a second screen for that, I just broadcast to the television set. It's such a simple process. But I only have to do that fairly rarely. And on a rare occasion when I've presented in public, it's been very easy to broadcast to a screen. So I don't have a multi-monitor setup though.
When you say broadcast to your TV, is it through an Apple TV and AirPlay, or is it just via an HDMI cable?
No, AirPlay, most of the time. Most of the time. I have an HDMI connection, but I rarely need to use it.
Yeah, that's something that has been useful for me from time to time to bring with me my Apple TV. And that allows me to be fully, let's say, mobile. And also, I like to also bring from time to time my iPhone or my iPad and then connecting the iPad screen and sharing the iPad screen is also easier. So let's actually go back to in history. And now I'm curious. So your first Mac, what was the context?
Well, the first Mac I helped someone purchase. So this is back in the 80s. And obviously, I'm from that era. And at the time, I started working in offices. So let me give you a little background on myself. I came to New York City back in the early 80s as an actor. And my degree was in theater arts and in acting from a very prestigious university. But even with that prestigious degree, I needed a day job. And so like a lot of people, I waited tables and I tended bar, and that's a very common thing to do. But then there was an ad in one of the theater journals for word processors. And nobody knew what that was. Nobody knew what that meant. And at the time, it was for something called a Wang, which was like a dedicated terminal that did nothing but word processing. And so I liked that job and that idea much better than I liked waiting tables or tending bar. What I loved about that job is when I wasn't busy, I still got paid. And it was, you sat in a padded chair in an air-conditioned office working on a pressure-sensitive keyboard. It was a big boost, and you got paid a lot more money. And at the time, this is $1984, you got paid to start like $17 an hour. And overnight rates were in the 30s an hour. And this is, you correct for inflation, that'd be about $100 an hour today. So I worked in offices as a secretarial temporary employee. And I started working. I worked for a lot of professional firms like law firms and investment banks and the like. And I got a long week to week, I worked a long-term gig at a very large investment bank. And right when the first IBM PCs were being uncrated and delivered to offices, and nobody knew what to do with them. And they all had IBM Selectric typewriters on their desk. And they would say, I don't know, let that kid over in the corner who does like all the word things, the typing, whatever, on that machine, let him do it. Let him figure it out. So I uncrated them and I learned how to learn some of the earliest applications on the IBM PC. One was Lotus 123, a spreadsheet application. And it was one of the in offices, that was the primary thing at first that they used the PC for. And they were amazed at it. It was like discovering fire for the Neanderthal. It's like, look at this. And so I first learned, my first programming was to learn how to program in cells on Lotus 123, and then slowly started to do other things. And then what happened is in these offices, in order to just to be a secretary in these offices, where, in the old days it was typing and phones, but this, you suddenly were running like 4 different machines like they were a pipe organ. So there was a Wang word processor on your desk, and there was an IBM PC that we did the spreadsheets with. And we had the spreadsheet on one device, we had the word processing on another. Then we did databases on a direct mainframe connection on a dumb terminal. And then there was this little box that looked like the earliest Macs. It was called a Quotron. And that connected you to the markets, to the stock markets, the various markets, including New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ, whatever. And you looked up various quotes and things like that and news items on that. So you were like running these 4 machines like this. And so within about a year and a half, and so I started, and all of these machines you could do some level of programming on. So I learned SQL programming, structured query language, running the dumb terminals. And I learned how to write macros on the word processor. And I was writing macros and cell formulas on Lotus 123. So I was getting this sort of graduate level course exposure in programming and technology. And after a couple of years there, people were asking me enough questions and I had enough answers about these newfangled things called personal computers that I left temping and I hung my shingle out as a consultant. And so with that, one of the very first clients that came to me was my brother-in-law, of course. And he wasn't computer savvy at all, didn't want to be computer savvy. And he was a probate lawyer who had a lot of data on his clients he wanted to organize some way. And with that, one day I'm wondering, like, I want to get him self-sufficient on being able to do his own things like word processing and databases and spreadsheets. And I'm walking by and there's this new store opened up on Wall Street. And it says, introducing the Macintosh. And I looked inside and I said, what are they doing in there? And I walked in, and that was the first time I'd ever seen a graphical user interface. It was on a box about yay big. The screen was 9 inches diagonally. No one had seen a mouse before. And so up until then, a floppy disk was literally floppy. You could bend it and damage it really quickly. And some of them were 8 inches wide. And then the smaller ones were 5 1/4. And then they had this 4.5 inch wide hard shell cassette that popped in and popped out. And you could put it in your pocket. And the guy demonstrating it to me, and you can do this. And he flung it against the wall. And he picks it up and he puts it back in the device and it reads perfectly. And you couldn't do that with the old machines, with the old discs. So these were all the revolutionary things that they packed into this box all at once. It was all intense innovation. So, and they had bought a lot of the technology from the Palo Alto Research Center at Xerox, if you remember, if you know
Yeah.
that history. And, you know, and Xerox was happy to get rid of it because they go, nobody's going to want to do anything with this funky, you know, cursor movement device we have and, you know, whatnot. And they put it all together and created the Macintosh. So I called my brother-in-law and I said, I think you're going to want to look at one of these machines. And I think you're going to want one when you see it. And I think the first one we bought might have been $900. I don't remember the exact price, but he was enthralled by it. And then we converted his whole office to Macintoshes and I set up my Signal. So right after that, very shortly after that, they introduced the bigger size, bigger format Macs. And I configured one for myself and I leased it at first. And I configured a Mac 2 CI. And if any listeners are out there on that, that was a workhorse of a device. And it was amazing. And it was a box, a monitor on top of a box. And I tricked it out. I put an IBM compatible board in it so that I could toggle between using it as an IBM PC and a Macintosh. Yeah, it was amazing. I could just hit a button and whap, I was into using it as an IBM PC with a command prompt and everything, you know, because Windows wasn't out yet. So the flexibility of this, where I was able to work in both, you know, platforms at the same time and hang my shingle out as somebody who was an expert in both, really drove my early consulting practice. Inside, I also put a fax machine board inside of it. I had a fax board inside of it. And that was the beauty of this particular device. You could just one screw, you popped off the lid and you put in a new board. You close the lid, you turned it on, and bam, the board worked perfectly. Over on the IBM PC side, when you did the same thing, you could be there for days configuring that board to be compatible with the device you put it in. And you'd be switching dip switches with a paper clip on the device. You'd have to be using a configuration tool in the software to set it up. The Mac board, whatever you bought, was probably 4 times more expensive, but probably 100 times more efficient in the setup of it. And one of the things I've always been impressed with Apple and Macintosh is how tightly their hardware specs are written. And so when you buy something that is pre-approved for the Mac, it's pre-approved for the Mac. It works flawlessly, generally, on the Mac. I know people have got stories of unboxing something and plugging it in and it didn't work the way they wanted. But it's much less, you know, it's much less common on the Mac than it is over on the Microsoft side. Still to this day. Also, the Macintosh revolutionarily corrected a lot of the flaws that were on the Microsoft side. And one key flaw, which is still there, is called the 640K barrier on memory. So when they first wrote DOS, the first operating system, the wisdom was the most powerful computer on the market today only has 64 kilobytes of memory. So we're going to pack 10 times that we're going to allow for 10 times that amount of memory. No one will ever need that much memory. That's 1 megabyte of memory. And so they put all the peripheral devices, the memory allocated to all the peripheral devices was allocated towards the top of that memory chain, 640 kilobytes. And they gave the applications and the user the bottom part of that. So today, even today, running a Windows device, when you log in, all of the peripheral devices load into that first 640K barrier. And then when your apps start, they have to do all these algorithms and utilities to leap over the peripheral devices to start allocating memory above a megabyte. So that's why some people working at a Windows machine still get what they call the blue screen of death. They get the warning out of memory, and you're going, I've got terabytes of memory in this machine. How can I be out of memory? Because that's out of that bottom number is of memory. So these are all revolutionary corrections to the Microsoft paradigm that just to this day, when you start a Mac fresh, everything loads in contiguously. And occasionally it's a good idea to reboot your Mac because the memory does get fragmented over time. If you're one of those people like me who leaves your laptop on all the time, even when you're transporting it, it's a good idea to reboot it, every few days if you can, so that all the memory gets assigned contiguously again and you're back on track. But that, it just got monumentally simpler. So you don't see the blue screen. You do see certain failures in the Macintosh occasionally, but you don't see that mind-numbing blue screen of death,
Yeah,
on there. So good. I didn't expect to come out with that much history, but I thought might be interesting for your listeners to know, what was so jaw-dropping about this technology when it first came
it's
out.
fascinating. Thank you very much for sharing that story. And I want to quickly piggyback on what you said about the memory. I have an iMac, and this iMac serves as well as an iCloud data sharing machine. So it's actually downloading all the iCloud stuff for all my devices. And so it's not really a server, but it acts a little bit like a server. And so I tend to leave it on all the time. And I realized after 4, 5, 6 days, I feel macOS misbehaving. Some apps are a bit slower, or some things do not work, and then I see sometimes Finder not responding. And now, and then I know, okay, I need to reboot the Mac. Just reboot the Mac to refresh basically the memory and get back.
Yeah, rebooting a device is the take 2 aspirin and call me in the morning response to any ailment.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a reboot. When in doubt, reboot.
And when you said that these companies were ordering a bunch of computers and then let's figure out that people would not figure out it reminds me now about actually artificial intelligence, right? Because I'm pretty sure in large companies, so here is the ChatGPT license, figure out what you can do with it now.
Right. That's exactly what's happening, buy now, figure out later. And when I first started at these investment banks, they had computer departments, and I was just a secretary, but I was operating all these computers, but they wouldn't refer to me in any way as a computer operator. I was a secretary. That's the only way they would look at me. And so as I became more familiar with all these devices, executives were coming to me and asking me more questions about more efficient ways to use them. What can they do? We didn't realize it, And so they had all these Fortran and COBOL programmers on staff. And one day I remember they said, that kid over there, that guy, I was called Ray the Temp for years. Nobody knew my last name. Ray, that guy, Ray the Temp, he can come in. And to this day, when I run into people, I ran into somebody I hadn't seen in 30 or 40 years. And I said, you might remember me as Ray the Temp. And his eyes lit up and he was like, oh my God, yes, we remember you. And so they invited me as a courtesy. I was allowed to come and sit in the back of the room of a computer meeting, a meeting by real computer people. And I sat and I listened to whatnot. And then over time, when they were considering rolling out a desktop computer on everybody's desk, they invited me to sit at the table as an interested user, as voice of the customer, if you will. And then within a year or so, I was the one calling the meetings and inviting them to attend. And they were on my, because these guys, they knew how to program in these languages, but they didn't understand. Only the people who came to it as electrical engineers understood how the device actually worked. And a lot of these programmers, they had never dealt with memory. They had never had to deal with disk space. I mean, they dealt with space. They dealt with columnar space in their databases. And, they were very refined about how much memory. They were very conservative, yes. But they never realized how to manage the whole thing together, which every grandmother today understands. Like, she needs a bigger hard drive today. She needs more memory. These guys didn't know how all of this worked together in conjunction. And so I was conducting seminars for them. So this was just a massive sea change in how business operated. And then when the Mac came out, so and the IBM PC basically ran back office business processes, like it did. It ran, the word processing, the secretary, the spreadsheets, things. It did data, it did calculations. But then the Mac came out and it could do artwork, it could do design, it could do, graphics in a way that nobody had seen before. We on the IBM PC at the time, we had a product called Harvard Business Graphics. And you practically had to be a programmer to get it to work, but they were amazed that you could get a circle, you could get a pie chart out of it. They're really, whoa, man. Their minds were blown. And, when Quark Express, this design software for the Mac, came out, it revolutionized graphic design, absolutely revolutionized it. Total disruptor, total game changer in everything. So then the COBOL and Fortran programmers had to get their heads around that, using a computer for creative means. And so, it cannot be stressed enough how this technology revolutionized the workplace.
And what was it the first time that you were able to use a mouse and a graphical user interface, and maybe also people in companies, right? How easy was it to pick up?
It was quite difficult for a lot of people. It seemed easy at the first start because everything was pretty pictures. But here's what technical support went from, and then to. It went from type this command at the C prompt, and if somebody wasn't at the C prompt, I could tell them how to get back there. Do this, click, 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 to type this quick command, boom. All you have is a C prompt. So that was my zero baseline I could start from. And this is on the phone. Imagine you're talking to somebody on the phone and type this command, hit enter. Here's what you should have gotten. Is that what you got? Yes, this is exactly what I got. Okay, type this command. But then it went to, can you find the funny looking little icon thing? No, it's a picture. It's called an icon. It's a funny little thing. And move your mouse. What's the mouse? It's the cursor. Do you see a little arrow moving on the screen? Yes. Put that over the thing. Okay, now click on that. What's click? What do you mean by click? So this is it. It made supporting people, and it still is. It still frustrates me. When I'm supporting somebody, it's like, so the graphical interface gave us multiple ways to do the same thing, where it was one thing before, type this one command, it'll do this one thing, to like, I'm trying to see, and this is before we had dial-in remote access to somebody's machine. So it got very difficult to teach people. And so then obviously the software Macintosh came out with tutorials that were wonderful. I said, you've got to do the tutorial first before I talk to you, because you have to understand what a click is, what mouse movement is, how to move the mouse, all of that. But it did relieve people from having to learn programming skills and command-based skills. You could now sit at any device and with a certain skill set, a baseline skill set, figure things out for yourself. Now everybody knows what an icon looks like. Everybody knows double clicking and clicking and what they all do and why it's different. And so again, this made it much more accessible. My first time using it, I remember being enthralled by it. And they rightly so, they put video games like Solitaire and things like that on there. And that was first designed to give you mouse practice. It wasn't designed to suck you into endless solitaire. It was designed to teach you how to click on things and move around and understand the speed at which things happen. That was confusing for some people because sometimes different computers and different software operated at a different speed. That got very confusing. So that all congealed after a while and became very consistent. So I just remember just playing with it for hours and then just being enthralled by it. And I switched very quickly from an actual mouse to a trackball. And I had one of the first trackballs ever made so that my hand wasn't going like this all over the desktop, and I loved it. I loved it. Kensington made it. I can remember the brand names. So
yeah, let's fast forward to today. Right now, you have a MacBook Pro. Yeah. Are you using primarily the trackpad, or are you the kind of people who need actually a physical mouse?
No, I use the trackpad almost exclusively. I don't think I have a mouse for this device. Yeah, but over the years, I'm left-handed. What's fascinating is over the years of being a temp and then a computer consultant working in many different people's offices, I always refused. I never moved somebody's mouse from one side of the computer to the other to accommodate me. And I always instructed people working for me, when you walk away, you leave their computer in the pristine condition you found it. So over the years, I became completely ambidextrous at using a mouse. And I have had occasion whereby I've had two laptops open in front of me using two mouses simultaneously with somebody standing behind me going, I can't believe you could do that. But it has come in handy more than once to do that. So yeah, I'm ambidextrous with a mouse, but I use the trackpad these days almost exclusively.
I'm left-handed, but for the mouse and the trackpad, it's on the right side because I learned with my right hand, and I think it would feel strange, even though I'm left-handed, to operate a mouse or the trackpad on the with the left hand, actually.
Interesting. Well, it's similar. I golf and I bat right-handed. So it's, because there weren't left-handed golf clubs when I grew up, a very similar reasoning to that. But you're right. Now, those right-handed mice were generally used on the Microsoft side. The initial Apple mouse was ambidextrous. It was symmetrically designed whereby you didn't have to favor one hand or the other. And then, but again, that's why, and I switched to the trackpad or the trackball, as I said, and I would generally use that with my right hand. But yeah, it's meaningful. It's how these things unfold.
So let's talk about applications. So you have a rich history of using applications. What are those that nowadays you couldn't live without, and especially running your business?
Well, today I use the Microsoft Office suite for Mac, for that, the full range of those, and I certainly couldn't operate without those. The video creation apps are on the Mac. So I use the iMovie quite a bit. I'm looking at different solutions to that. I think when you and I first talked, we were both talking about some of the limitations in iMovie that need to be addressed, and there are other apps for that. But with this particular MacBook Pro, I'm able to compile video very quickly and edit video very quickly. So I use it a lot for developing content for my various social media things. The things that I also, very, very simple tools that are bundled in with the Mac, QuickTime, I use, and I'm in it almost every day, reviewing a downloaded video or editing, trimming one, very, very quick, easy things to do on these apps. I love to cook. So one little unknown app that I have that I highly recommend to people is a cooking recipe application called Paprika. And I proselytize on that. If you like to cook, I think this is one of the best apps to have. It syncs on different devices. It has a grocery list in it, and you can cut and paste recipes from, online sources for it. And and I think it's written exclusively for the Mac, if I'm not mistaken. It might have a Windows version at this point. So let me see what else. Obviously, I mean, everything else being online and being SaaS, worthy. I use Chrome on the MacBook, and I find that to be very efficient. I prefer it over Safari and over Firefox. I've got those loaded on as well, and use them in a pinch when Chrome is wonky on there. So, and on the Mac, I use the Mac Preview instead of any Adobe Acrobat products. It's just much simpler and free for the most part. I can edit, I can do anything I need to using Mac Preview that I could do in an Adobe product on there. So those are some of the ones. Those are my go-tos every day.
Yeah, if I go back to Preview, for me, it's one of the unsung heroes of macOS. It's such a versatile, both image editor, but also PDF editor. Extracting a page from a PDF is a drag and drop. Copying or merging two PDFs, again, it's very quick, very easy. It's still manual, right? But
now I had a freelance gig earlier this year working on film production in which I did all of the back office documentation for them, and it all happened in PDFs and through Preview. And I will say that there was this one glitch that I looked at, and I was hoping that Apple was going to be addressing it soon. But you make all of these edits to a PDF, and if you're not super careful about how you save that document, once you've made the edits, it strips the edits out. And it may look like it's saving it. You may close it and reopen it, and your edits are still there. But then you transfer it to Dropbox, or you transfer it to Google Drive, and somebody else opens it and they're gone. So I would send these documents over to an accounting department saying there's nothing in the document, it's blank. And I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. So we had to learn very carefully that I had to save to iCloud first, and then from iCloud transfer it over to Dropbox or to the Google Drive. In order for it to save the changes. And I looked it up online. It's a known thing, people complaining about it. And Apple openly says, we have no intention of trying to fix that.
Yeah.
It was, yeah. So that's my one little misgiving. But other than that, it was a workhorse, and the job relied on it. And everybody relied on Mac Preview in that case.
Yeah, I've been bit by the same issue as you have. And the workaround that I've developed, or that I'm using now, is doing a print, basically file print, then save as PDF, and then I make a copy, a kind of a flat copy of the document, and I'm sure that now I have my edits. whatever happens after I closed Preview, I know I have a good copy.
There you go. And the other thing is export as PDF, export to PDF before you do anything. Before I saved it in its original format, I would say export as PDF, and then I would save it, and then I would go back, and the export had what I wanted.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's very funny. And then one case, it got really wonky, and we had to save everything as JPEGs. And so that, there were no editable sections on the image anymore. It was just a picture. And we couldn't, to this day, I probably lost more hair scratching my head over that one. I was like, what is going on here? So.
Yeah. Very good. So we're almost at the end of the show. We are now at the haha moment segment. So what tip or trick did you discover recently on your Mac that you wished you knew before?
That's a great question. So for me, I think one of the top things is that how quickly AirDrop, how efficient AirDrop can be. Now, I know other people live by it, and that's not their aha moment. But moving files between my devices using AirDrop. I've used AirDrop in the past, but just how efficient it is at transferring files. It also helps solve the PDF problem. And I would call that, in the old days, I called that beakering. You're pouring something out of one beaker into another. And I found that when I airdropped it over to another device sometimes, and then airdropped it back, I had those edits in there much better preserved. I don't know how it encodes it. I don't know what's going on in there. Somebody listening might be able to shed light on this. But the efficiency of AirDrop has often been one of my big aha moments in this.
In a sense, I think it shows the power of the ecosystem, or the usefulness of having devices, all those devices manufactured by the same company, and the software stack as well, developed in unison and so on. At the same time, there's at the back of my mind is like, it's a little bit of a failure for iCloud, because if iCloud was a bit faster to synchronize things, we wouldn't need that, right? Oftentimes I take a picture or a screenshot on my phone to make a tutorial or something like that. I use my phone because it's an iPhone screenshot, and I want it on my Mac in another app. And like you said, I will airdrop the picture, and it will be faster than waiting for photos to synchronize to iCloud to resynchronize to my Mac.
Thank you, because that was the original thought that popped up into my head, and I couldn't frame it well enough. But that's exactly it. That moving, particularly photos and things like that, it takes too long to sync. And when I want it right away on the other device, I have to use AirDrop. And I'm blown away at how smooth and efficient AirDrop is, and fast, particularly on large files. When I'm moving a large video, I'm amazed at how it can move a several gigabyte, 10 gigabyte video within a matter of seconds between devices. And but part of that is how my MacBook is configured. But when I've taken a particularly long video on my phone and I want to edit it, and I pop it over, but you're exactly right. It can be an hour in some cases before iCloud updates it.
Yeah, it's because, so the way AirDrop works, the technology behind AirDrop is a dual Bluetooth and Wi-Fi peer-to-peer connection. So Bluetooth, just to make sure that the devices are near each other. But then there is a fully encrypted peer-to-peer Wi-Fi connection between the two devices. So it doesn't even go through the router. It's like, if your device is very close by, basically the Wi-Fi signal of both machines is very strong. And that's why it's super quick.
Yeah, good to know. Thank you for clarifying that. I was wondering, because it's always in my living room when I'm doing this, and I'm amazed at it. And that's what I was saying. Just the other day, that's when it popped up, because a friend of mine took a long video of putting up this Christmas tree. This is a fake tree. It takes an hour or so, and so we did a stop video on there. And when we were I was trying to get it over to his device, and I said, it wouldn't email, it wouldn't text, it was too big for text, it was too big for email. And I said, I said, make sure you connect to my Wi-Fi, and we're going to AirDrop this. And it was like, boom, done. And that was one of wow, I don't know how they wrote that technology, but it works. So you just explained it to me. It's the combination of the Bluetooth and the Wi-Fi.
Yeah, and I don't even think the other person need to be on the same Wi-Fi network, because it's really a peer-to-peer connection. It's like direct device to device. And it's actually only recently that Apple introduced AirDrop over the internet, right? So you can initiate an AirDrop transfer. And if the file is really, really large, then you can leave the house and it will continue, but through Apple's iCloud servers.
Oh, interesting.
That's one of the newest features of AirDrop. Very good. Last question in the outline. If you were in charge of the Mac division at Apple, what would be your first priority?
Repairability. I just find that that's a tremendous disservice to the American consumer, particularly, for instance, that I have to schedule a change, a repair visit to get a battery change, just a battery change. On the Windows-based machines, you often just pop one out and you pop a new one in. And I really wish that there was a universal standard for that. Same thing with the phone. I can't believe I have to go in and then I have to sign a waiver for my phone that in case we break the phone, we're going to give you a new one at this price. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me that we are hostage to this type of, thing. On the Windows side, on the IBM side, the IBM compatible side, components were always swappable. You could open the box as an end user consumer and pull something out and put something in, particularly on the desktops, but even on the laptops. And the fact that these cases are all hermetically sealed and you need a licensed professional to open it up, I think is a tremendous disservice to the American public, to the world, the consuming public. So,
yeah, there are pushed by governments from all around the world to improve that aspect of things. And yeah, they now they offer repair kits and they allow people, so the right to repair movement. So
the right to repair movement. I'm a big believer in it. It's affected all sectors of the economy. I saw a segment recently where by a John Deere combine in a farm was out of service because of an electronic component in the dashboard. And the farmer did not have the right to repair it on his own. Where in the old days, he'd just, his own machines, he just got out a crescent wrench and he fixed it and he was back to work. This huge combine sitting on a farm for days waiting for a John Deere mechanic to show up and replace this electronic component. It's really, I find the right to repair movement, I think, is very important for the economy.
Yeah, I second that. And if I would go one step further, I would add even the making the operating system more compatible or extend even the support for security updates. Apple is doing already a great job. I think much better than on the PC side. Based on the last thing that I wrote, it's about 8 to 9 years of support for security updates for Macs, which is very good. In reality, so on one side, what you talked about, repairability, right? When a device has a small malfunction, how to make sure that we can continue using it. But there are also plenty of devices that pass the 9-year mark that are considered obsolete by Apple and that run still very well. The hardware is actually pretty good. and then the problem is, even if the hardware is good enough and still functions, you can't, and I would say for normal users, but also especially for professionals, you can't use them because they're like security holes, right? All over the place.
Right. I have never in my technology career been what I consider an early adopter. I always wait for a second or third generation before I jump in. I like someone else to work out the kinks. And I tend to keep stuff in service far past what the manufacturer's expiration date is. And when I owned a computer consulting here in Midtown Manhattan, company here in Midtown Manhattan, people would walk into my office sometimes and go, "Ooh, you have a lot of old equipment. How come?" I say, "Because I know how to keep it in service." And some of my machines were generations old, but they were operating faster than the current generation because I said, this is a testament to my skill because it's the configuration of the machine that is making it. I had certain bus configurations in these machines that were working in a certain way. So, all they want to do is upsell you to the next one. Of course we do. But then what I have turns into space junk, turns into garbage, in some pile in some foreign country someplace. And it really is, a crime against nature in a lot of cases. There has to be another way to create a revenue stream whereby the hardware can stay in service. Rather than having to throw the entire box away, if you want me to upgrade to a faster machine, just let me switch out a component. That's all that has to happen. Let me switch out the chips, and we used to be able to do that. We went from a 486 chip to a 586 chip by opening a box and dropping the new chip, pulling the old chip out, putting a new chip in. It often worked brilliantly. If we could get back to that model, I wouldn't have to throw out things that are still serviceable. I have to turn in the entire computer now and get a whole new computer if I want to upgrade at this point. There's no reason for that. There's really no reason for that, particularly if I'm satisfied with how the current. I don't need a higher resolution screen. I don't need the latest and greatest Ultra 4K HD screen. I'm okay with what I have, and many people are. That's not a sign of my age. It's just many people are happy with how their device is working. And, now, but that's clearly not how the business model works. So
no, recently there was on Netflix, I think it's Netflix, has been a documentary called Buy Now. I don't know if have you watched it?
I have not watched it. I've seen it advertised.
It's really great. It's the setup is like a false advertisement, or it's like a false, how would I say that? Yeah, it's really like management speech, or from within. No, it's like when you have an onboarding sequence of a new employee, but onboarding somebody would actually trash the environment. Everything you need to do to trash the environment is like it's really good. It's really good. It's eye-opening, a bit sad and depressing at times, but I think a must watch actually. Yeah. Very good. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to go back memory lane. And
well, I hope it was valuable and interesting for some folks, but thanks for having me here, Damien.
So where can people find you online?
So I really prefer to connect with people on LinkedIn, and they can find me at my username is Ray Shaub, RaySchaub, and let me know that you heard me here on Macpreneur. And then I'll share the episode out on my LinkedIn profile. And really looking forward. So I'm a mental fitness coach. And so, if your Mac is driving you crazy, maybe you should call me for that.
Yes.
So,
if it's not a technical issue, call Ray.
Yes, right. So, but very good. No, I would look forward to hearing from folks and getting their thoughts and feedback on today's episode.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you a lot. So if, like Ray, you would like to share how you are using your Mac to run your solopreneur business, it's simple. Just visit macpreneur.com/apply. If you are already on Podmatch, just click on the button and you will land on the show profile. Otherwise, fill the application form and I will get back to you within the next few days. Once again, it's macpreneur.com/apply. In the comments below, please share your main takeaway from this episode. And if not done yet, please subscribe to my channel so you will get more helpful tips on how to run your business on your Mac. And until next time, I'm Damien Schreurs, wishing you a great day.
Thank you for watching the Macpreneur podcast. If you've enjoyed the show, please leave a comment and share it with a friend right now.